Chapter 19, Fire. Chapter 19, Fire. Endure today. Repetition of training and discipline. Ingrid had always lived this way. But it was the first time today's repetition had brought him to this particular moment. Am I going to die? That was the first thought that came to him in response to the company commander's reaction. He quickly corrected himself. If she wanted me dead, she would have done it earlier. When did Krang slip away? He hadn't even sensed Krang's presence leaving. TCH. Even now? I'm still lacking. Ingrid felt the inadequacy of his trained hearing. It was in his nature to notice such things. This realization caused him to miss the timing to respond. The newly appointed company commander, a fairy woman, was staring straight at him. You're alive, hey, she had said. What was he supposed to say to that? Ingrid opened his mouth. Should I have died? No, not at all, she replied, her lips barely moving. The company commander stared at him for a while longer before turning around. She then retrieved the poisoned needles scattered on the ground and began checking the condition of Vengeance and the sentry she'd brought along, rolling their eyes back to examine them. Is she checking to see if any of the soldiers died in the chaos? Afterward, she brought one of the poisoned needles to her lips and lightly tapped it against her tongue. She must be well versed in herbalism. He'd occasionally seen mercenaries do similar things. Given the fairy's deep connection to nature, it wasn't surprising that some had a strong understanding of poisons and medicine. Ingrid remained slumped on the ground, merely watching her. He had no intention of getting up. Of course, if someone were to target his neck again, he'd roll or twist away to evade. But for now, exhaustion weighed on him. While this wasn't as draining as the first day of repetition, it was still grueling. If the first day had drained his physical stamina, this time it felt like his mental strength had been utterly depleted. He'd evaded countless attacks solely by relying on sound. Not a single scratch had marked him. Naturally, that was no coincidence. How many times had he been caught off guard in the past? Though he'd been ambushed silently on occasion, he'd also narrowly evaded initial attacks several times. Repeated patterns were something one could learn. Even assassins had patterns in their movements. Ingrid had instinctively learned them. So, I've experienced this once already. Would it be easier the second time? No, absolutely not. Anyone who witnessed the repetition of Ingrid's day, who went through it alongside him, could never make such a claim. But there was no one who could. In the isolation of his repetitive days, he was always alone. Ingrid pressed his temples with his fingers as he sat there. The excitement hadn't worn off, and his head throbbed faintly. He had a sense that this would eventually turn into a headache. Instinctively, he could feel it. Rustle. Suddenly, Ingrid sensed something being pointed at his neck. He reflexively twisted his body to the side and extended his palm. There, Krang stood, mimicking a motion as if to chop at Ingrid's neck with his hand. Do you actually have eyes on the back of your head? Krang asked with genuine curiosity. This doesn't seem like the time to be joking, Ingrid retorted. The nerve of this carefree guy. Krang smiled lazily, speaking in his relaxed tone. Ah, my bad. Was the assassin really after this guy? If so, why didn't they just kill him? Why come after me first? Was it just bad luck? Could it really be that simple? No, it couldn't be. The assassin must have been targeting Krang. It didn't make sense for an assassin to go after Vengeance or Ingrid. Killing me or Vengeance would only invite unnecessary suspicion. Sending an assassin to eliminate two powerless soldiers? That would be overkill. The purpose of an assassin was to kill swiftly and silently. If they wanted to clean up the aftermath, they could have simply set the tent on fire. No one would question stab wounds on a corpse burned beyond recognition. Even if that wasn't the case, there were countless ways to dispose of bodies. They could erase all traces of blood and toss the bodies in a remote area. The assumption would be desertion, not abduction or murder. Especially in this remote field infirmary. It wasn't a place for officers, just a temporary medical station for lower-ranked soldiers. Nobody paid much attention to such places. Of course, even reaching a place like this wasn't easy. They were probably after me, Krang said. It was when the company commander finished tidying up inside and peeked out of the tent. Krang, crouching beside Ingrid, casually muttered. Why? You don't seem too surprised, Krang said, glancing at her. I am. Believe me, she replied. Good poker face you've got there. Was this really the time for this conversation? Ingrid almost chided him but stopped himself. He knew from experience. This man had an unflappable personality. Of course, maybe he gets serious when the time comes. Though Krang wouldn't remember it, the sight of him delivering a speech that drew in everyone's attention had been burned into Ingrid's memory. Are you going to tell us who you really are? The company commander's voice, silent and sudden, broke the air. Krang shrugged lightly and responded. I'd say sorry, but no. If that was an apology, it didn't feel like one. Krang stood, dusted himself off, and glanced around, locking eyes with the company commander. I'm not in a position to give orders, so I'll ask for a favor instead. It was strange. He spoke casually, even to someone of higher rank. This was the sort of behavior that could get him killed if he wasn't a high-ranking noble. He didn't just talk, though. With a single step forward. That was all it took. The air shifted, just like before. The same suffocating presence from when Ingrid had asked about his identity enveloped the space. Krang silently held their gazes. 2 spectators, 1 performer. But the performer was like a vortex, pulling everything around him into his orbit. Will you do it? Consider it a debt I'll repay. Go ahead, the company commander replied with a respectful nod. Krang offered a gentle smile. I hope no one else dies today. It was small, but his voice carried a quiet yet unyielding strength. If magic could imbue words, this was how it would sound. A tone and delivery that made you want to obey. How could he evoke such feelings? Ingrid felt an odd sense of déjà vu. Perhaps it was because he had experienced this once before. The vortex that drew everything in quickly dissipated. Krang extended a hand to Ingrid. Legs gave out. No, not quite. Ingrid grasped his hand, his feelings a tangled mess. Did you change your mind about something? Watching the two, the company commander asked. Let's just say I did. Krang replied, leaving Ingrid clueless about their conversation. Not that he felt like asking. They probably wouldn't tell me anyway. The company commander sighed quietly and turned to Ingrid. Can you keep what happened today to yourself? Yes, of course. Given the way she asked, as if ready to slit his throat for a different answer, what else could he say? He'd glimpsed her skills earlier. Just one move. But how could she parry like that? With a single motion, she had deflected Ingrid's attack, sending him sprawling. He'd love to see that technique again. But if he did, it would mean his death. And so, the repetition of today would begin again. If he refused to stay silent now, would she let him live? No, that wouldn't happen. There are many ways to keep someone quiet without killing them. Killing would have been pointless, not to mention suicidal. I'm counting on you. More than anything, Krang's words carried weight. Though Ingrid had only spent a few days and shared a handful of conversations with Krang, he felt a connection. The bond they had formed wasn't insignificant, transcending the brief time they'd known each other. The two had become strangely close, as if time played no role in their camaraderie. Keeping secrets is my specialty. It wasn't an empty boast. Within the squad, there were several secrets Ingrid had entrusted to him. Some were critical, others trivial, but none had ever been revealed. Well then, we just need to settle this situation. The company commander spoke, glancing at the torn tent and 2 fallen soldiers. When you say no more deaths, are you including those 2 as well? Krang's question was met with a casual nod from the commander. No one here truly knew what had transpired. But if they found out? Judging by the atmosphere, it seemed best to keep Krang's identity concealed. The company commander appeared deep in thought. When that guard wakes up, will he remember being attacked? Ingrid dusted the dirt from his seat as he spoke. He probably won't. Even if he does, he wouldn't have seen anything. The commander spoke with partial confidence, and Ingrid agreed. After all, how many times had he been caught off guard himself? The freckled sentry likely fainted without realizing what had hit him. Well then. Can you carry one of them outside? The company commander turned to Ingrid at his suggestion. I have a simple and convenient solution. However, it might get me into some trouble. If that happens, I'll need you to cover for me. Ingrid explained his plan. Krang chuckled upon hearing it, while the commander nodded without a hint of humor. Whoosh! Who? The sentry in front of the barracks, dozing off during his shift, suddenly felt a sharp sting on his cheek and woke up. As he opened his eyes, a warm heat brushed against his skin. Half asleep, he turned his head, only to freeze in shock. Fire! Yes, it was fire. Flames were climbing up the front of the tent, embers scattering in the air. Clink! The spear he had been holding dropped to the ground, jolting him fully awake. Fire! 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 The startled guard shouted, his tongue stumbling over the words in his panic. Fire! 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 He couldn't even manage to shout fire properly, repeating the word in a panic-stricken tone. But his urgency was enough to grab the attention of others nearby. Fire! A patrolling sentry shouted, his voice echoing through the camp and clarifying the situation. The infirmary tent is on fire. The observant patroller's announcement rang out loudly. Fetch water! At last, soldiers began sticking their heads out and assessing the scene. Damn it, is there anyone inside? Yeah, there's that one soldier. The fire that had started at the front of the tent quickly spread upward, engulfing the entire structure. The chaos of the night had begun. Thick black smoke and flames rose into the sky. Even the bravest soldiers hesitated to rush into the burning tent. Get water, now! The supply company commander shouted, spurring those who were already scrambling for buckets of water. Splash! Water splashed onto the flames, momentarily causing smoke to billow, but the fire barely faltered. Form a line for bucket passing. The commander barked orders, drawing on his experience with logistics to implement an efficient solution. Soldiers formed a chain, passing buckets filled with water along the line toward the fire. Thud! One clumsy soldier dropped a bucket, spilling its contents. What the hell? Pick it up, now. Understood, sir. The commotion continued as the flames lit up the soldiers' faces. The supply commander stomped his foot in frustration. The fire spreading to neighboring tents would be a disaster. For him, containing the fire was far more critical than saving any lives inside. As the coordinated efforts began to douse the flames, the commander sighed in relief. But what caused this fire? The weather wasn't particularly dry, so it wasn't a high-risk season for fires. Thankfully, the flames didn't spread. The fire seemed to know its limits, consuming just the one tent before dying down. There's someone inside. A soldier with sharp night vision pointed out. Bring them out. It's a relief they're alive. The supply commander uttered the words, though he cared more about the fire being contained than the survivors. Incrid laid the freckled guard next to Vengeance, whom the commander had carried outside. Over here. He called out, drawing people over. Are you all right? Suddenly a fire. What happened? Incrid, his face smeared with soot, coughed as he answered. I'm not sure either, cough cough. It just happened so quickly. The late-night fire incident was ultimately written off as an accident. Who-oh-oh? An owl's distant call echoed from the direction of the forest. It was likely from the woods nearby. The fairy commander, guided by the sound, compared the map in her head to her current location and moved forward. She reached her destination, a pebble-strewn stream not far from the camp. Once there, she spoke. If not for that squad leader, things could have been dire. Just from inspecting the barracks, the commander discerned the assassin's intent. Eliminate the ones at the entrance, then go straight for the target. The one at the entrance had been Incrid. Thanks to him, Krang survived. Had he faltered even slightly, both he and the target would have perished. I see. Krang exhaled deeply, observing her. The commander turned away. Well then. With that, she offered a simple farewell. Her fairy-like footsteps made no sound as she disappeared into the shadows. She was the commander of the 4th Company, 4th Battalion, Cyprus Division. It was time for her to return to the camp. The fairy disappeared into the darkness, vanishing from sight. Watching her go, Krang thought of Incrid's dream. A knight, hell. You've given me an idea of how I should live my life, too. Krang's words to Incrid after hearing his dream were genuine. Though he could deceive others, he had never uttered an insincere word to someone who approached him with sincerity. Krang had a secret tied to his birth. But he neither liked his lineage nor the secrets it entailed. He had avoided them until now. Maybe it's time to face it. Krang recognized Incrid's talent at first glance. Despite the odds, Ingrid dared to dream of knighthood. Most people would dismiss the idea as absurd. Some would mock it outright. Yet, he pursued it. Krang sensed in Ingrid's resolute fists a determination that would not waver. People like that rarely changed. What an amusing friend. A strange sense of closeness lingered. As the clouds above cleared, moonlight began to shine once more. Krang continued walking, sensing that a different life awaited him. Chapter 20, Squad Leader Ingrid. Chapter 20, Squad Leader Ingrid. Between the tents stood a torch stand. The supply tent had oil, of course. They had been training for days, repeatedly listening to sounds and honing their awareness. By now, Ingrid could identify everything around him and its location even with his eyes closed. "Let's take care of this quickly," he murmured. It was a simple task: locate the patrol soldiers by sound, sneak into the supply tent to grab some oil, and spread it haphazardly around the tents. The next part was even easier. He kicked the torch stand, toppling it. Avoiding watchful eyes, Ingrid crawled stealthily in the shadows, pulling the stand inward until it fell over. The embers at the tip eagerly embraced the oil, flaring up with a fiery greeting. "Well, aren't you talented?" the company commander commented nonchalantly. Was that a compliment? Ingrid took it as such and set the tent ablaze. Naturally, the flame started where the oil had been spread. Ingrid dodged the spreading fire, smudging soot on his face and inhaling some smoke. It was far easier to genuinely react to the situation than to feign it poorly. Cough, cough. He hacked and carried a freckled soldier who had collapsed to the ripped side of the tent, exiting the same way the company commander had entered. Looping around the tent, he dropped to the ground near the medical station. That was enough for now. Fire! The timing was deliberate, ensuring the flames erupted as the patrol soldiers approached. The sentry at the neighboring tent, though, was a master of standing asleep and didn't stir. Ingrid almost suspected the assassin had shot him with a poison dart too. This didn't require much preparation. He merely stole oil from a supply tent he already knew well and knocked over the torch stand. However, both Krang and the company commander, who witnessed it all, seemed rather impressed. "If you'd joined a band of thieves, you'd probably be their leader by now," Krang had said just before they parted ways. Ingrid wasn't sure if that was meant as praise. Running a hand through his hair, his fingers snagged on a curl. "Guess I should trim my hair too," he thought, lying down without even bothering to wipe the soot off his face. It wasn't a big fire, and no one had died. He had even come up with a decent excuse for the sentry's negligence. "I'll deal with it tomorrow." Tomorrow. For now, he just wanted to sleep right there and then. It had been a long night. A truly exhausting day. His headache had dulled his thoughts into a hazy fog. He wanted nothing more than to stop thinking altogether. Survivors? There. Though, looks like he just fainted. He knew the words were about him but chose to ignore them, closing his eyes. Fatigue enveloped him. It wasn't anything particular about the freckled sentry, but Ingrid felt an inexplicable fondness for him. He wouldn't know but. He mused. Ingrid had spoken with him, learning about his hometown, the girlfriend he left behind, and why he joined the military. Today, at least for Ingrid, was another day they lived through. That alone forged a sense of camaraderie. And none of the fire or ambush was the sentry's fault. So, Ingrid fabricated an excuse. The soldier had shouted when the fire broke out and tried to rescue those inside before succumbing to the smoke and fainting. He was a newly trained recruit, after all, and they hadn't exactly trained him for tent fires. It was a plausible enough story for everyone to accept without question. Did I really do that? The soldier, lacking any memory of the event, was understandably confused. Looks like the smoke got to your head, the supply company commander remarked casually. Ingrid had worried someone might suspect him, but no one did. Perhaps his explanation was too perfectly timed. The supply commander seemed more relieved that the fire hadn't spread to the supply tent than concerned about anything else. Since the situation had played out as planned, Ingrid considered it a success. The next morning brought a new day. It wasn't a repeat of yesterday. Although he woke with lingering headaches, Ingrid felt a sense of satisfaction. At least he had survived today once more. "You saved me." Having washed his face, changed out of his smoke-stained clothes, and trimmed his hair with a dagger, Ingrid met Vengeance. Vengeance sat atop a supply crate, staring at him. I couldn't just let you burn to death before my eyes, Ingrid replied. Vengeance muttered under his breath before asking, why? Did this really require an explanation? With his pounding headache, Ingrid wasn't in the mood for a lengthy discussion. We're comrades. Vengeance's expression hardened. A sharp inhale followed. Noticing this, Ingrid added, the flower of the battlefield. Is the infantry, Vengeance finished. It was the infantry unit's creed. With that, Ingrid turned away, recalling the order to return. You are nothing but trouble, Vengeance grumbled faintly behind him. Normally, such mutterings wouldn't have reached his ears. Hearing training. Ingrid reflected on the skill he had honed and thought about the fairy company commander deflecting his blade last night. He also recalled dodging the assassin's thrusts and stabs. A curious thought emerged. Am I still standing in the same place? It wasn't a deep concern, just a passing curiosity. How much had he changed between yesterday and today? A sudden urge to spar with REM struck him. But first, he decided to return to the main camp and rest. His headache hadn't subsided. The weather's beautiful. Noticing his long shadow stretching to his right, Ingrid looked up. The sky was a brilliant blue canvas dotted with fluffy white clouds. The breeze was cool, and the sunlight warm. Today was an exceptionally clear day. Walking under such a sky felt as if it might chase away his headache. Kreis outwardly remained calm, but internally, he let out deep sighs. Ingrid had been gone for exactly a week. What on earth did we do back then? Faced with the current situation, Kreis's mind sought refuge in past memories. He thought back to the time when Ingrid wasn't around. So, I'm the squad leader here, which means you all have to listen to me. That's why I'm telling you to gather in front of the tent now. The squad leader, who repeatedly stammered well, you see, had once displayed a commanding presence. He met an untimely death on his first battlefield. Follow me. It was evident he had bought into some strange rumor. Something about how, though the squad of troublemakers might be small in number, their skills were exceptional. Did he genuinely believe such individuals would meekly follow his lead? He charged ahead alone, only to have his head skewered by a spear. When his helmet flew back toward them, REM kicked it away with a casual backward swing. The next squad leader. I hear some of you are quite skilled. Care to prove it? Anyone up for a duel with me? This one was reportedly a noble's child. Rumor had it he was serving in the military as punishment for some crime, though no one knew the details. He claimed he'd only be here for a few months before returning to his previous life. The noble was confident, but he had no experience. Is it really okay to spar with the squad leader? REM asked, scratching his head. Not you. Let's see, you there, the one with the reddish-brown hair. He picked Jackson. REM, with his rough demeanor, looked like trouble incarnate. Clearly someone who could fight. Calling on Kreis, however, would have been too much, so the noble must have thought Jackson seemed manageable. Of course, it was a grave mistake. Me, sir? Yes, you. Come here. Let's spar. Huh? I've never lost before. What happens if someone gets hurt during the duel? A man shouldn't fear such things. It'll be water under the bridge. The arrogant, cocky noble faced his challenge. Hey! And promptly broke his forearm. I figured he'd dodge, Jackson said flatly. Usually laid back, Jackson could turn into a complete maniac on occasion. The squad's teasing didn't help. You should have stepped forward with your left foot back there. Ridiculous. Just trip him outright and end it. He's gripping his sword too lightly. Hold it tighter, or you'll get hurt. Pathetic. Can't even knock someone off their feet? I'd have finished this ages ago. What a bore. Jackson's calm demeanor shifted dangerously, and the noble squad leader paid for his arrogance with a broken arm. The company commander exploded in anger. You attacked your superior. He insisted on the duel and promised it'd be water under the bridge. Exactly. A man's word is his bond. Though his word changes with every sentence. I beg forgiveness for my sins. With every remark from the squad, the commander found himself unable to retort. Facts were facts. Unsurprisingly, the noble squad leader slunk away with his tail between his legs. Back in his family's domain, he probably had plenty of well-paid swordsmen willing to lose to him. But this was the battlefield. The company commander hadn't intended to drag him into combat anyway. His squad leader title was purely ceremonial. Subsequent squad leaders weren't much better. One particularly hot-headed leader had a quiet talk with REM outside the barracks and requested a transfer shortly after. The others left for similar reasons. The ones who stayed got along no better than strangers passing on the street. Creyas turned at the sound of a sigh behind him. Finally. He saw the face and muttered with relief, "What's with the state you're in?" It was Ingrid, massaging his temples as he approached. Ingrid glanced at the two squaring off in front of the barracks. This is what happens when there's no squad leader. I'm the de facto leader, so do as I say. Got it, Ragnar? Don't call me by name. Use my family name and add sir, you barbarian. Ha, since when did you start pretending to be a noble? I simply find it offensive for an uncivilized beast to address me by name. Oh, really? You need a savage beast to knock some sense into you. REM's hands flexed, veins bulging, as if he might split a skull with his axe at any moment. Ragnar, however, stood casually, his arms at his sides. This was his usual stance. Jackson watched with disinterest, while another squad mate quietly prayed for peace. Brothers, violent souls nothing, the praying soldier said. Step aside, preacher. Stand back. Blades don't discriminate, said both REM and Ragnar simultaneously. The squad's a disaster, Creyas muttered. It had only been a week, yet chaos reigned. Got any spare meds? Creyas asked Ingrid nonchalantly, ignoring the escalating tension. Nope. Busy as I am, you'll have to deal with it, Creyas replied before addressing Ingrid. Wait a second, Ingrid said, stepping between the two combatants. Stopping a fight here required more than words. It required action. Ingrid moved directly between them. What kind of idiot steps into this mess? REM muttered, though the tension in his hands dissipated. With visible annoyance, both REM and Ragnar stepped back, but not without trading parting shots. Don't die on the battlefield. I want to kill you myself. What's that? Tomorrow? You're dying tomorrow? Can't wait to split your skull. Enough, Ingrid muttered, shaking his head. Why were these two always at each other's throats? No one knew. It had always been this way. Honestly, so much happened while you were gone, Creyas said from behind. Clearly, Ingrid replied, observing the disarray. Creyas wasn't kidding when he called the barracks a mess. Though he had expected it, Ingrid sighed inwardly. Nothing he hadn't survived before. A little chaos was nothing compared to what he'd been through. Missing meal duties. A punch-up with a neighboring squad. Ignoring orders to report to the platoon leader. Isn't this a bit much, even for just 1 week? Creyas continued to chatter. Ingrid nodded absent-mindedly, until something Creyas said caught his attention. A curse? Yes. They say the entire camp is cursed. What nonsense is this? The absurdity of it made even his headache seem trivial. Chapter 21, Sparring and Reflection. Chapter 21, Sparring and Reflection. Crash. A bolt of lightning split the clear sky, followed by the soft patter of raindrops. This ruins the mood, grumbled Ragnar. HMPH, REM replied curtly. The heated argument between the two fizzled out as they averted their gazes, avoiding further confrontation. That was the end of their spat. Together, they sought shelter from the rain, retreating into the barracks. The sudden downpour was bizarre, especially since the skies had been so clear. It seemed the weather had taken a turn for the absurd. Late autumn was no time for unexpected showers, and this kind of rain, void of even a single dark cloud, was a rare sight. Rain out of nowhere, Creyas muttered, staring at the raindrops falling from the seemingly clear sky. Ingrid also glanced upward, replaying events that had occurred in his absence. The idea of a curse still lingered, though he dismissed it as mere superstition. So, would they say even this rain is part of the curse? Maybe, Creyas said with a shrug. Over the past 3 days, one scout tripped and broke his nose, another fractured his arm, and Rotten got bitten by a snake. All 3 were part of the reconnaissance team. The first scout, though agile enough to perform somersaults, probably shouldn't have tried such stunts in full armor. It was a miracle his broken nose was the extent of the damage. The second, Jack, had a foul mouth and an overconfidence in his spear skills. His broken arm came from a sparring match, and Ingrid was willing to bet his opponent had deliberately targeted it. Finally, Rotten, despite being in the reconnaissance unit, lacked a cautious nature. It wasn't snake season, but there were areas of the plains where the creatures were prevalent. In short, all these incidents were explainable. And let's not forget the guy who burned himself on a pot. Creyus's tone was one of amusement rather than concern. If he truly believed in a curse, he wouldn't be speaking so light-heartedly. To him, it was just idle chatter. Oh, and the medic tent caught fire. Weren't you there, squad leader? Hear anything about it? The medic tent fire, was that being attributed to the curse too? Yeah, I saw it burn, Ingrid replied nonchalantly. Creyus whipped his head around. You actually saw it? Did the fire just suddenly flare up? I heard rumors about an infiltrator. No, Ingrid thought. I set it on fire. The infiltrator theory held some truth, as there had been a raid. But whether the raiders were truly enemies remained unclear. Krang's identity was still a mystery, though Ingrid suspected he was at least a noble's illegitimate child. If so, the attackers might not have been enemy soldiers but allies in disguise. As for curses? There was no point discussing nonsense. The leadership would soon crack down on such rumors, no commander would tolerate them spreading within their ranks. Hey, squad leader! Did you see anything or not? Creyus pressed him for an answer. Ingrid met his wide-eyed gaze, deliberating. Creyus was too much of a blabbermouth to hear the truth. Even if he weren't, there was no reason to explain. Ingrid had already decided to keep quiet. All I saw was the tent burning, he finally said. Who? Didn't you know? Not at all. So, no enemy attack? It really just caught fire out of nowhere. A sentry fell asleep, a gust of wind toppled the torch stand, and the oil barrels nearby caught fire. From there, the flames spread to the tent. Ingrid mined a spark igniting and flames spreading with his hand. Nothing special, then. And you're not worried that I almost died in the blaze? Well, you're standing here, aren't you? Is that supposed to be reassuring? Ingrid wondered. So, if you're alive and well, does that make you a ghost, squad leader? REM chimed in from behind, laughing. Does he think that's a joke? Ingrid thought as he turned toward him. And so the Lord says, let the restless spirits rest, recited one of the more devout squad members, as if performing an exorcism. If Ingrid had actually been a ghost, he imagined those words would be rather unpleasant. Only my hair got a little singed, he muttered. The scorched ends of his bangs had been hastily trimmed with a knife, leaving his hair looking noticeably uneven. With black hair, it's not even noticeable, REM teased with a grin. And what about your ash-colored mop? Is that just a pile of cinders? Ah, you got me. My hair's just a pile of ash. Was this genuinely amusing to him? Even though no one else was laughing, REM continued to crack jokes. Soon, the rain stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The idle chatter ended there. Creyus left to tend to some business, and Ingrid lay down to nap, lulled by the soft drip of water from the edge of the tent. It was a sweet, restful sleep. When he awoke, the headache that had plagued him earlier was gone, and his fatigue had dissipated. Ingrid stretched, twisting his waist from side to side. The pain in his ribs was completely gone. He felt refreshed and invigorated. The barracks were empty. From outside, he could hear footsteps and muffled voices of soldiers grumbling about the erratic weather. What's with the rain starting and stopping like that? Ingrid pushed aside the tent flap and stepped out. Most of the squad was scattered around, taking advantage of their personal time. Not seeing Jackson or Creyus was no surprise, but the others were nearby. Spotting REM scribbling something on the damp ground, Ingrid approached him. Looks like you're free. Does it? REM replied without looking up. You're right. I'm so bored I was just debating whose skull to crack next. REM's talent for picking fights with squadmates was one of his specialties. His hobby involved provoking someone until they snapped, then beating them senseless. Since Ingrid had joined, this behavior had become less frequent, but REM hadn't abandoned it entirely. Then spar with me, Ingrid suggested. Sparring? Yeah. A match? REM shrugged and nodded. This wasn't anything new. Ingrid's sparring requests were a regular occurrence. Fine by me. The two headed to the clearing behind the barracks. Thanks to the strange weather, no one else was around, and even if they were, no one would care. Ingrid stood 10 paces away from REM. REM grinned, rolling his wrists. The sunlight glinted off his axe blade, freshly sharpened and ready for use. Though the rain had stopped, the air was thick with humidity and carried the earthy scent of wet soil. The ground was soft but not muddy, offering decent footing. The sunlight, partially obscured by clouds, wasn't blinding. A perfect day for a fight, REM remarked. Is it? Ingrid replied as he awakened the heart of the beast. He refused to let time go to waste, striving to make every day count. Physical training, sharpening his senses, and honing his mind were all part of his regimen. Valen-style mercenary swordsmanship won't work here. After countless bouts with REM, he'd learned that thrusting attacks were ineffective against him. The question was, what approach would work? Considering his weapon, the pressure REM exuded, and his own experiences, Ingrid calculated his strategy. How could he land an effective strike? Now was the time to test the answer he'd reached after much deliberation. With a soft scrape, REM stepped forward, planting his foot confidently. There was no hesitation in his movement, only bold assurance. So, I have to make the first move. Ingrid didn't reply. Instead, he focused on REM's breathing, stealing his rhythm. Inhale. Exhale. REM's breaths were long and steady. The moment REM exhaled, Ingrid closed the distance in an instant. Ingrid propelled himself forward with a powerful push from his hind legs. As the distance between them closed, whoosh! The sword in his grasp slashed horizontally through the air. REM leaned back, arching his waist as if lying down, narrowly avoiding the strike. It was a feat only possible due to his precise anticipation of the sword's trajectory. Even while half reclined, REM's gaze never wavered from Ingrid. Ingrid, noticing this, reflexively pulled his sword back to guard himself. Whoosh! Clang! A flying axe struck his blade. The impact wasn't overwhelming. No matter how strong REM was, an axe thrown from a reclining position couldn't carry much force. Still in that position? Whoosh! Whoosh! The axes kept flying. Clang! 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 Ingrid gripped his sword tightly with both hands, blocking each strike. He tried to find a moment to regroup and launch a counterattack, but REM didn't give him the chance. Ingrid felt as if he were standing beneath a relentless guillotine. The torrent of axe attacks only stopped when REM fully rose to his feet. Though there was a brief pause, Ingrid neither retreated nor adjusted his stance. As REM straightened his back, he pulled his arm backward. Instead of stepping back and steadying his breath. Thrust! Ingrid lunged forward, delivering a thrust he had practiced countless times. It was a precise extension of his blade from his current stance, determined to land the strike. Everything happened in an instant. The blade shot forward, aiming for REM's midsection. But as it neared, Ingrid's vision suddenly caught a mix of blue sky and an inverted image of REM's face. What? REM's upside-down face filled his vision. Whoosh! In the moment of the thrust, REM had kicked Ingrid's ankle. The instantaneous move threw off the blade's aim, causing it to slice through empty air. Instead of swinging his axe, REM released it entirely, grabbing Ingrid by the collar and hurling him to the side. Ugh! Rolling to the ground, Ingrid quickly pieced together what had happened. It had been a trick. REM had only pretended to prepare for another axe swing, using that moment to his advantage. Phew! Sprawled on the ground, Ingrid shook his head in disbelief. The sheer strength was overwhelming. Ingrid prided himself on his strength, believing few could match him. Yet, REM had thrown him with one hand as if he weighed nothing. Sure, he wasn't wearing armor, making him relatively light, but this was still a show of monstrous strength. Looking up from his seated position, Ingrid saw REM's face. His expression was unusual. Normally, REM smiled throughout their sparring sessions. But not this time. His lips were set straight and his face was calm. He wasn't smiling. Hey, what have you been eating behind my back? REM asked with a serious expression. Thinking about it, the reaction was natural. REM likely had no memory of assisting him with thrust training. After all, during that first session, Ingrid had only been assigned to kitchen duty. I thought it before, but your skills have grown quite a bit. That thrust, pretty good. Not bad at all. Really? Yes. I don't flatter. Sure you don't. Ingrid dismissed it as a joke, coming from someone who was always spouting nonsense. I'm serious. Got it. Let's review, then. You really never change, do you? How is it that you're always so consistent? Post-sparring reviews were a routine for Ingrid. No matter how little there was to gain, he would doggedly analyze the session, determined to learn something. While most opponents often had little feedback to offer, that wasn't the case today. Things had changed. Today's spar had left REM with plenty to say, a testament to how much Ingrid had improved. For starters, waiting for my axe was too obvious. Even if I don't fall for it, you should at least try to deceive me. REM started to speak, and Ingrid nodded attentively, as always. REM chuckled at the sight of Ingrid's focused demeanor. He always began with the main points, leaving minor details for later, a style Ingrid deeply respected. Ingrid listened intently to every word. For 3 days, there were no battles. During that time, Ingrid sparred with REM 3 more times. You should work on your lower body. Something about your balance feels off, REM remarked. Though he often made offhanded remarks, REM had a sharp eye for identifying core issues. Ingrid took those words to heart and reflected on them deeply. Afterward, he threw himself into even more rigorous training. While others rested during their free time, Ingrid trained. During personal maintenance hours, soldiers often engaged in their own activities, writing letters or focusing on rest. But apart from eating and sleeping, Ingrid devoted everything to honing his skills. To an observer, his lifestyle might seem extreme. To Ingrid, however, it was a state of peace. The gradual improvement he felt each day brought unparalleled satisfaction. Even the increased strain on his body from the training didn't faze him. What a relentless guy. Back at it as soon as he's out of the infirmary, someone remarked. He seemed quiet lately, but now he's back at it again. If I trained like that, I'd be a knight by now. Ha! What nonsense. Amid his grueling exercises, Ingrid focused his hearing to distract from the pain in his muscles. When his body screamed in agony, concentrating on external sounds made the suffering fade. Nearby, he overheard the idle chatter of 2 soldiers from another squad. Though they were part of the same platoon, the distance between them felt significant. Pushing his hearing further, Ingrid strained to pick up more distant sounds. The rustling of fabric behind him hinted at movement, and he tried to guess what action it corresponded to. Listening to footsteps, he attempted to identify who they belonged to. He guessed wrong half the time, but he could recognize familiar steps. Light, swift, yet with an oddly lively rhythm against the dirt. Big eyes. He was right. Still training? You're insane, Kreia said, approaching. Ingrid ignored him. As he repeated a squat motion, his legs began to tremble. Sweat trickled from his scalp, pooling at the tips of his eyebrows. The erratic weather had finally cleared, returning to its usual dry, arid state. On such a day, sweating profusely might seem odd. Especially in a battlefield, where a fight could break out at any moment, such rigorous training seemed out of place. But for those around him, this was simply Ingrid's way. Doesn't that exhaust you? How do you keep it up every day? Kreia asked, sitting nearby and chewing on a piece of jerky. A droplet of sweat slid down Ingrid's brow, falling to the ground. A dull ache radiated from his thighs, his muscles trembling violently as nausea crept in. He had reached his limit. Finally, Ingrid collapsed, drenched in sweat. As he sat there with his eyes closed, the cool breeze brushed against his damp forehead and ears. Another day's training was complete. As he basked in the wind, enjoying the moment. Thud, thud. Heavy footsteps approached from behind and came to a stop. You're as relentless as ever. Tilting his head back, Ingrid looked up at the source of the voice. A shadow stretched over his face, blocking the sunlight. Though the man's face was obscured by the backlight, his rugged beard was unmistakable. Got a moment to talk? It was the leader of the 4th Squad. Chapter 22, Reconnaissance. Chapter 22, Reconnaissance. The 4th platoon leader threw out a casual remark. Ingrid responded indifferently, sensing that this man had something to say. If you have something to say, go ahead. He was currently enjoying the cool breeze after being drenched in sweat. The timing was perfect, a moment of relaxation accompanied by a pleasant breeze. So, he hoped the man would quickly say what he needed to and leave. "We'd like you to join the reconnaissance unit and carry out missions," the 4th platoon leader said, crossing his arms. It wasn't the firmness of a commander that came through, but rather a defensive posture. Incrid thought for a moment. Reconnaissance unit. This wasn't a typical request. Moreover, Incrid was well aware of his ambiguous position. The only reason he could remain at a squad leader's level was because this was the 444th squad. And now, they wanted to move him to the reconnaissance unit? "Is it all right to take our squad leader?" REM suddenly interjected from behind, leaning his chin on Incrid's shoulder. Given the small height difference, it was a somewhat natural posture for leaning. "Are you serious?" Half laughing, REM's question sounded more like a protest against taking Incrid away. "It's an order, REM." The 4th platoon leader glared at him, but it was clearly just posturing. Incrid noticed immediately. REM was a troublemaker, a reckless berserker who swung his axe at the slightest provocation. Invoking the authority of a commander on someone like REM was meaningless. Both Incrid and the 4th platoon leader knew this. REM. Before his axe-loving squad member could say anything further, Incrid called his name and shrugged him off his shoulder. "Well, do as you like." REM grumbled and backed away. "I can go instead," Ragnar said nonchalantly, observing the scene. "You want us to find ourselves behind enemy lines?" Hearing this, REM chuckled, and Ragnar flared up momentarily but swallowed his anger. It wasn't a wrong observation. Ragnar had no talent for navigation. Even with a map and directions, he would still end up in the wrong place. Nor was he particularly skilled at coordinating with others. Wasn't that why he ended up here, ignoring orders and fighting his own way in every squad he'd been in? He had too many shortcomings to be selected for a reconnaissance role. "You're not an option, Ragnar," the 4th platoon leader said, shaking his head. While the entire situation gave Incrid a bad feeling, he thought, "All things considered, I might be the most suitable for this." His ambiguous position had significance only among the 444th squad members. Even during the week he was away due to injury, his absence caused considerable commotion. And now, they were specifically calling for him? That implied they had no better option. The talk of a curse had quickly died down, but its effects lingered. Bo, Jack, and Rotten, all former members of the reconnaissance unit, were gone, leaving them short-staffed. "Sigh, it's a headache for me too. One of the squad leaders has food poisoning and can't move," the 4th platoon leader said. It almost seemed reasonable to believe in a curse, especially since this was happening exclusively to the reconnaissance squad. The 4th platoon leader looked utterly drained, clearly not enthusiastic about calling Incrid. "This feels oddly off." As Incrid stared at him, the 4th platoon leader finally relented. "Don't look at me like that. I'll explain everything." "Who?" "I said stop looking at me like that." "What did I do?" He had just been staring, but the 4th platoon leader sighed heavily, overreacting. "Seriously, stop glaring like that. It's unsettling. Sometimes you need to consider how the person on the receiving end feels, especially if they're your superior," REM said, snickering. Reacting to REM's joke would lead nowhere, so Incrid decided to listen to the 4th platoon leader instead. To reinforce the reconnaissance unit, they promoted a squad leader to platoon leader. "But we're still short on numbers, so we were ordered to draft suitable individuals from other squads. Your name came up during the selection process. From the higher-ups. The new company commander. You're not in trouble, are you? Could this be about silencing me for knowing too much?" If they wanted to eliminate him, there were simpler ways. No, there was no need for such measures. It seems like a casual suggestion. Incrid judged it to be just that. It's an order from above. Just go along with it. Behind him, REM sharpened his axe while Ragnar insisted again that he could go. Meanwhile, another squad member stood in front of the barracks, head raised to the heavens, praying fervently. "O holy Lord, do not take my small and precious squad leader from me. Do not test your fragile servant." The 4th platoon leader was dumbfounded. Who's taking him? And who's small and fragile here? The praying soldier's bulging arm muscles seemed to flex with every word. His arms alone were the size of an average soldier's thighs. If this devout warrior was considered fragile, then few in the world could be deemed sturdy. This is just a one-time thing. Winter will arrive soon, and this campaign will likely end with it, the 4th platoon leader explained. by the next campaign, the reconnaissance unit's roster would be reshuffled, and the 444th squad leader wouldn't likely be included. Incrid understood the reasoning. Wars rarely continued through winter. So, there was no need to overthink it. These temporary assignments were common. While he lacked exceptional talent for combat, he excelled in other areas, including reconnaissance missions. However, due to his recent absence, his squad seemed particularly unwilling to let him go. I really am the best fit for this. It wasn't baseless confidence. If he ended up in a dangerous situation, he could always reset the day. This mission was uniquely suited to him. Your orders, squad leader, the 4th platoon leader said. His words sounded less like a command and more like a plea for help. Incrid glanced back. IEM was sharpening his axe. Ragnar was again offering to go. And the last squad member continued murmuring prayers to the heavens. What a sight. If he came back injured, these guys might riot together. Were things always like this? No, it hadn't been this way when he first joined. When did it change? Did they struggle a lot while I was gone? Even Big Eye shook his head in exasperation. But orders were orders, and no matter how unruly his squad was, Incrid wasn't like them. Looks like I have to go. He exhaled deeply as he spoke. The higher-ups had decided, and defying orders wasn't an option. While there might be ways to get out of it, they weren't worth the trouble. With Incrid's single statement, the atmosphere settled. It was only natural. No matter how much of a mere title it may be, he is the leader of this squad of only 6. Do as you like, REM said, puffing up and letting out a huff, responding. I told you I can go, Ragnar insisted, but that wouldn't change anything. How could a scout, who gets lost even within the camp, possibly be trusted? Incrid found it more surprising how Ragnar had managed his life of wandering. Hadn't he claimed to have gone all the way to the easternmost sea? Wasn't it possible he got there by getting lost? It was a reasonable question, but it was one that didn't need asking. As always, Incrid kept a certain distance from the group. If they didn't want to talk about it, he wouldn't pry. That was the nature of squad leader Incrid. Fine, whatever, the platoon leader said and turned to leave. His steps were lighter than when he had arrived, as though the burden on his shoulders had been lifted. While platoon leader was away washing and resting, a small stir began in the barracks, starting from an innocuous remark. Have you been practicing what you learned? The question was posed by Jackson, who lay half-reclined on his bed. Jackson's bed was at the farthest end of the barracks, while Incrid's was at the front. Everyone in the barracks could hear Jackson's voice. Incrid reflexively nodded. Having learned the discipline of enhancing hearing from Jackson, he had spent each repetitive day training. He thought it was the right time to ask. But then, REM showed a displeased reaction. What did you learn? Throughout this time, Incrid had learned a little from many of the squad members. He had picked up bits and pieces from REM, Ragnar, and even the devout squad member. All of them were survival techniques for the battlefield. Incrid had learned eagerly, though he never mastered it all, and mostly just used what he picked up. Some things were too difficult to learn perfectly. At least, now, the heart of the beast seemed to have finally settled within him. But he had never learned anything from Jackson. What did you teach him? REM, who had been lying down, sat up and asked. Keep at it. It will help, Jackson said, fully ignoring REM. Flames of anger flickered in REM's eyes. Is this guy serious? Stop it. Incrid grabbed REM's shoulder, which was now ablaze with fury. What could you have learned from that sly bastard? You can't learn anything good from just anyone. Heh. Jackson, who had been listening to their conversation, let out a laugh. Oh, right. I suppose it's your time to die. Today's the day. You want to become food for the monsters wandering the plains, right? Isn't that so? Jackson remained indifferent. Incrid sighed deeply and pulled REM's arm. Just call it. We're not here to kill each other. Don't worry. I'll survive, REM said, as if nothing could stop him. No, that's not what I meant. Who's going to survive? Oh, Lord, should I send this foolish, faithless soul up to be comforted by the divine? If you allow it, I will do so. Don't do anything unnecessary and don't waste your energy. Incrid began to regret whether taking the reconnaissance mission was the right choice. Is it right to leave them behind? Don't worry too much. It'll never come to an end. They just clash a few times with their weapons, Kreia said, counting silver coins from his pocket. That's the problem. The few times with weapons. To an outsider, it would seem like a deadly fight. Despite being such troublemakers, their commander still didn't dismiss them. Why? Because of their exceptional abilities. In battle, they were certainly soldiers with superior combat capabilities, worth more than 10 ordinary soldiers. So it was right to pull them into the reconnaissance unit. I won't be a drain on their strength, Ingrid thought. But they weren't the same. As soon as this thought crossed his mind, Ingrid became acutely aware of his own shortcomings. I have no talent. He had even lost to a 12-year-old child. No matter how much of a genius the child was. A grown man who couldn't even handle the weight of a sword properly, stumbling while wielding it, lost to a child holding a sword. It wasn't a matter of pride. There was no reason to despair. It was simply a moment that made him reflect on himself. But had he given up? No. He had just rethought the situation, thoroughly understood it, and accepted himself. Was that the end? No, that wasn't it. If there's no talent. Someday? If one step is too much, take half a step. As long as you don't stop taking steps forward, it'll be fine. And Ingrid had never once stopped moving forward. Feeling like sleep wouldn't come, Ingrid grabbed his sword and stepped outside. He thought swinging his sword and breaking a sweat might make him sleep. Ragnar saw this and got up to follow him. Let me see your stance after a long time. Am I not here? Rem, who was late to stand up, said. Their eyes met, and a fierce tension filled the air. At the point where their gazes met, it seemed like a vortex would form. Consistent practice will help. More than any half-baked swordplay, Jackson, who had been lying in bed, said. The moment their eyes locked, both of them shot their glares at Jackson. Half-baked? Rem said. Swordplay? Ragnar continued. You both, didn't you say you'd watch my stance? Ingrid interrupted, standing between them. After finally calming the two, Ingrid went outside the barracks. Following their half-compliments, half-lectures, he swung his sword repeatedly. The day passed, drenched in sweat. When the morning sun rose, Ingrid had to temporarily switch to the reconnaissance unit and head out. He wasn't too worried. He didn't think it would be difficult. After sweating it out, it seemed like everyone's discomfort had passed. Having sweated and bathed by the stream, Ingrid fell into a peaceful sleep. Platoon leader, why did that guy choose to join the reconnaissance unit? The ferry platoon commander, noticing the first platoon leader standing near the signal pole, asked. Step away from the signal pole. It could cause a fire if you fall. Yes? Move to the side. Yes. The first platoon leader took a few steps to the side. The platoon commander's tent was taller and wider than the usual tents. It had a signal pole in the middle to light a fire. Although rudimentary, there was also a table for meetings. This was the place where they decided the route for the reconnaissance mission. Meanwhile, the first platoon leader had asked a question. He had every right to ask. The first platoon leader also served as the platoon commander's assistant, a long-standing tradition in the Cyprus division. He's quick-witted and knows how to look after himself. Thought he'd fit in well. Ah, I see. It wasn't a heavily weighed judgment. It was based on intuition. No further explanation was needed. If anyone asked, the answer would simply be, just because. Of course, the judgment was correct. The fairy's intuition was sometimes sharper than a prophet's words. Chapter 23, The Thread of New. Chapter 23, The Thread of New. Listen for sounds that are more unnatural than usual. The scouting party set out in the blue dawn, long before sunrise. As Ingrid was quietly packing his belongings alone, Jackson, who had been standing watch as the final sentry, spoke up out of nowhere. Suddenly. Confused, Ingrid asked what he meant. You once asked how to avoid getting hit by a sword on the battlefield. Ingrid recalled the moment. The infirmary, the assassin's ambush, the fairy unit commander, Krang, and the fire. After wrapping up all the chaos, he had returned to find his unruly squad in the middle of a brawl. His mind had been scattered. And yet, as Jackson reminded him, the memory resurfaced. Before all the commotion, before his final dance with the assassin, he had asked in passing. Sure, I get that you need to listen carefully, but you can't stay focused on listening in the middle of a battle, right? How do you dodge without even looking? Honing one's hearing, fine, that made sense. But that required intense focus. Could one truly listen so intently amidst the chaos of the battlefield? Sounds impossible. He knew because he had tried. Perhaps, with enough practice, one might manage movements bordering on miraculous against multiple opponents. But one thing was certain, simply listening well wasn't enough. Jackson was diligent. He didn't brush off a passing question and answered earnestly. And Ingrid was even more diligent. He didn't miss an opportunity to learn. So, you're saying I should sense the oddities. It would be good to attune yourself to unfamiliar sensations, but that's not easy. So instead, if you're in a grassy field, focus on the sound of the grass rustling and find the noise that doesn't match. The scouting area was a grassland, a field filled with grass that ranged from ankle to eye level. It felt as though Jackson had tailored his advice to their mission. As Ingrid listened to the thoughtful explanation, a question popped into his mind. You're pretty detailed about this, ho? At that, Jackson stared directly into Ingrid's eyes. It was a gaze that seemed to say, you already know, so why ask? When Ingrid tilted his head in confusion, Jackson finally added, because the squad leader is relentless. What? Where had the conversation gone off track? Why suddenly call him relentless? Jackson was referring to Ingrid's tenacity, his passion for the sword. But Ingrid was utterly clueless. He considered asking further but closed his mouth. Did the reason even matter? The whims of his unpredictable squad were hardly unusual. So the reason didn't matter. Right now, there was a teacher willing to teach and a student willing to learn. If the content held value, that was enough. Since he was about to be dragged off to join the scouting party anyway, reflecting on what he'd learned while training along the way wasn't a bad plan. Thus, he ignored the unnecessary details and pressed on. How do I distinguish between different types of sounds? Erasing his momentary confusion, Ingrid returned to the core topic. Jackson's gaze grew peculiar, as though he were witnessing a three-headed dragon. Why? Nothing. Jackson continued his explanation. What constituted a strange sound? How should one utilize their hearing? It was excellent advice, a joy to learn. Ingrid set off on the path, deeply satisfied. So, that's how it works, huh? Jackson still looked at Ingrid with an odd expression. But Ingrid didn't notice and turned to leave. Well then, I'll be off. As Ingrid walked toward the outskirts of the camp for his scouting mission, Jackson thought to himself. It doesn't make sense. Recently, he had seen the squad leader react to footsteps from quite a distance. His hearing range was remarkably broad. While others might miss it, Jackson couldn't be fooled. There was just something off about it. Based on every training method and every individual he'd seen trained in the same way, honing one's hearing meant continually distinguishing between different sounds. That process helped one identify the type of sound. But what about the squad leader? His ability to hear is top-notch, but his skill in distinguishing sounds is that of a novice. It was as though he'd undergone short-term, intensive training focused solely on listening. But could that even work? If someone had dozens of spare lives, maybe they could train like that. How peculiar. The squad leader was indeed a strange person. Still, it prompted Jackson to share as much of his knowledge as possible. And the squad leader would likely absorb the lesson immediately. Honing one's hearing was challenging, but distinguishing and categorizing sounds was merely supplementary. When Jackson finally finished his watch and entered the barracks, REM was there, lounging on his side with a sly grin, propping his head up with one hand. Your face pisses me off. Jackson offered his morning greeting. REM chuckled softly and replied. Falling for the squad leader's charm, are you? You just want to teach him everything, don't you? It's a fair trade. I owe him, so I'll get equivalent value in return later. That was Jackson, the embodiment of equivalent exchange, as the unit nicknamed him. But even as he said it, Jackson knew. Teaching the squad leader wasn't about demanding something in return. It had been an impulsive decision. Maybe the squad leader's recent battlefield feats had left an impression. Jackson didn't dwell on it. Sometimes, he knew, it was fine to act on impulse. So the matter ended there. Shut up, you bastard. What kind of man gets shy about this stuff? REM cackled and lay back down, pulling his blanket up to his chin. Soon, his breathing steadied as if he had succumbed to warmth and slumber. At times, Jackson couldn't help but wonder. What gives this insane brute such unshakable confidence? Go lie down. If you try anything while I'm sleeping, I'll split your head open. REM spoke, feigning sleep. Jackson ignored him and found his spot. Arguing with REM was pointless, it only invited more words. Typical bastard. Never answers me. As expected, REM muttered complaints after his own remarks. The scouting party, which had set out at dawn, started off on the wrong foot. If we run into those Aspen bastards, I'll split their heads open. Got it. So said the squad leader in charge of the small reconnaissance unit. Incrid almost blurted out, "Do you even understand what scouting is supposed to be?" But before he could, the squad leader spoke again, turning to him. "Loose cannon squad leader, you're just a soldier right now. If you're going to disobey orders, say so now. Let's settle it with skill. Unlike some, I didn't get promoted by kissing ass, so I'm confident." The tone was anything but friendly. Incrid wasn't offended, nor did it sour his mood. Praise like this wasn't new. Simple insults from those who didn't know him meant nothing. Besides, creating unnecessary friction wasn't worth it. Better to quietly patrol, reflect on what he'd learned, and return. Even if it's annoying, just put up with it. Seems like they've got a bit of a brash personality. The soldier walking closely beside him spoke with a gravelly voice, showing his age. "Don't worry about it." "Glad to hear that." The soldier smiled humbly, avoiding the squad leader's gaze. Not a bad impression. "All right, let's move out." The 10-man patrol unit, doubling as a reconnaissance team, set off. Being part of a reconnaissance team didn't always mean infiltrating enemy territory. This particular plain, known across the continent as the Green Pearl, was a vast expanse of grassland. To the east, there were a few gentle hills and low mountain ridges, but overall, the view was open and unobstructed. To the west flowed the Penhaniel River, considered the lifeblood of Norilia, and a shared resource with the enemy, the Duchy of Aspen. Because of the geographical openness, ambushes were nearly impossible in battles on this plain. So what did reconnaissance teams do? Their tasks involved scouting enemy territory and patrolling nearby areas, watching for groups attempting to move unnoticed, tracking any signs of enemy cavalry, or identifying suspicious activities. They also confirmed key strategic locations during their patrols. Naturally, reconnaissance was a dangerous job. Encounters with enemy forces could happen anytime, and clashes between reconnaissance teams often escalated into full-scale battles. Such confrontations weren't frequent, though, nor should they be. Let's go show the world the might of Norilia's infantry. To Incrid, the youthful squad leader was a fool drunk on his own abilities. Perhaps he was an illegitimate child of some noble or had backing from someone in the command structure. 19, maybe 20 at most. A quick promotion for a squad leader in Norilia's regular army. But compared to true geniuses, soldiers like him were a dime a dozen. The role of the reconnaissance team seemed entirely absent from the squad leader's thoughts. Some soldiers even echoed his sentiment. "Of course, sir. With your skills, a few foes won't be an issue. Show us the strength that took down 5 mercenaries. That brat's head will swell so much it'll burst." Even without being told, it was obvious how things ended up this way. Recon squads likely faced frequent injuries, leaving them shorthand. That's how Incrid and these fools ended up here. Still, this group was below par, even by low standards. Yet, there wouldn't be much trouble. Reconnaissance routes were predetermined. Patrol in a circular path centered on Allied bases. The specifics were up to the squad leader, but Incrid assumed things would be fine unless the squad leader did something drastically foolish. This is a news footprint. The squad leader noticed tracks while passing by. The gnu was a herd animal resembling a cow, often seen running in groups of 20 to 50 across the plains. Let's track this and have a barbecue tonight. Chasing 20 gnus? Seriously? What was even more absurd was that these weren't gnu tracks at all, they belonged to a gazelle. Sure, why not, murmured a soldier with a good impression, smirking as he stared at the back of the squad leader's head. On the first day, the patrol wasted time searching for non-existent gnus. Naturally, no animal willingly surrendered to a group radiating hostility. Damn it, the squad leader cursed in frustration. If they'd caught something, would the idiot have actually lit a fire? If so, It would have been quite the spectacle, a reconnaissance team starting a bonfire. Might as well announce, "We're total fools." Fortunately, they caught nothing. Before nightfall, they found a campsite near a hill with 4 large trees and prepared to rest. "Where are you from, squad leader?" It was the soldier with a good impression who asked. More than anything, his eyes were filled with contempt for their squad leader. "Border guard." "A career soldier?" Ingrid nodded. Border Guard was a fortress city on the frontier, a military town filled with training facilities and professional soldiers. "I'm from a mountain village and pride myself on my hunting skills, but calling those tracks new shocked me. They were clearly gazelle tracks." Ingrid shared the sentiment. The two found common ground in their disdain for the squad leader. The hunter's name was Henry, an easygoing soldier with no love for their commander. "Tomorrow, I'll teach you something fun." On the plains, animals follow distinct paths, even if they aren't obvious at first glance. After chatting for a while, Henry quickly fell asleep. During his third watch that night, Ingrid recalled lessons from Jackson. Though he didn't draw his sword, he practiced mentally, replaying the duel he had with Ragnar and REM before this mission. "Always incorporate thrusts into your stance," REM had said. He'd also emphasized leg training. Recon teams walked a lot, inevitable for infantry. "Walking's fine," Ingrid mused. It wasn't bad for building leg strength. Sustained by jerky alone, he should have felt empty, but his mind stayed focused on training, sword techniques, the auditory exercises Jackson taught, and hunting tricks Henry promised to share. Ingrid genuinely enjoyed learning and mastering skills, and applying them even more. "Once I return, I'll spar again," he thought. Throughout his watch, Ingrid trained his ears while contemplating his next steps, eventually waking the next guard before sleeping himself. On the second day, the patrol resumed their march at dawn. That morning, Henry taught him to identify animal trails. Hearing the rustle of grass against their calves, Ingrid thought, "So much to learn." He genuinely enjoyed the practical hunting knowledge Henry shared. Over here, the squad leader led the group into a field of tall weeds. This seems fine, Ingrid thought, the path aligned with their mission. But, as expected, the squad leader shattered his expectations. "We'll cut through this field and track enemy scouts." "What do you think? Is this guy insane?" Ingrid nearly said it aloud but held back. How would they navigate in the weeds? And what guarantee was there of finding enemy scouts this way? All they needed to do was check for anomalies or signs of ambush. "Don't interfere." "Not all squad leaders are the same," a subordinate said dismissively, stepping in. Well. Ingrid wasn't angry, just debating whether to let this play out. The decision came quickly. He let it go. If things went south and they all died, he'd reassess tomorrow. If not, they'll just waste time and head back, he concluded. Either way, it wasn't his loss. Chapter 24:3. Chapter 24:3. "The wind is blowing this way, right? But these short grasses here are flattened in the opposite direction, forming a circular shape. Do you see that?" Henry stepped on the base of a tall grass stalk, pushing it aside to reveal the shorter grass underneath. As he uncovered the traces left in the grassland, Henry began to explain with ease. "Ah, I see." Ingrid responded, studying the ground closely. It made sense when explained, but finding it alone would have been challenging. This place was known as the Tall Grass Meadow. Looking around, it was an endless expanse of green. A bard traveling across the continent once gazed at this plain during the height of summer and named it Green Pearl, signifying its lush, verdant beauty. Among the greenery, the tall grasses appeared darker, like the depths of an ocean. It was an apt name. This damned grassland wasn't a pleasant place for humans to roam freely. If one let their guard down, the swaying grasses would slap against their face and eyes. Bugs clung to every part of the body. Crickets and grasshoppers leapt about, while frogs occasionally appeared in pools of water. Seeing a frog brought to mind the frog who had once kicked him. Of course, frogs claimed they were entirely different creatures from actual frogs. Killing a frog in front of them elicited no reaction, but threatening to crush their heart would ignite a fierce response. Just one hit to the side. Even though he had reflexively blocked it, one strike had been enough to knock him down. How much time would he need to match the strength of a frog? Not yet, but someday, perhaps he could face that frog in battle. Doubt lingered. It was inevitable. Persistence didn't always mean an absence of doubt. But there was no time for doubt, either. Instead of wasting time questioning, he'd rather swing his sword one more time. As soon as negative thoughts crept in, Ingrid pushed them away. There was no sense in worrying over what couldn't be resolved immediately. With that, he focused again on Henry's explanations. The soldier, a former prairie hunter, exuded positivity. Even when the squad leader acted like an idiot, Henry simply shrugged it off, telling Ingrid to endure it. Not that Ingrid needed to, he was used to shrugging things off himself. Henry, ever the hunter, observed their surroundings even in this situation, pointing out details. It made for an engaging listen. There's not much animal droppings here. Why's that? Henry tilted his head, puzzled. Is that an issue? Ingrid asked, pushing aside the thick, tall grass leaves falling over his head. This grassland might look like useless weeds to humans, but it's a haven for creatures that rely on this grass as their staple food. Normally, there should be more signs of animals, yet there are few here. Fewer animals. Why? Ingrid brushed off an insect clinging to his cheek with his fingers. It wasn't a leech, but it extended a sharp proboscis as if to suck blood. Looking at the bug and the obstructive grass around him, he felt an overwhelming urge to grab a sharp scythe and cut it all down. Sure, you talk too much, the reconnaissance squad leader said, glancing back. He frowned at a cricket leaping past but made no complaints. That's unexpected. Ingrid had thought the leader would be full of irritation, ranting about the inconvenience of the grassland. Instead, the man kept quiet. Though the sea of green dominated, patches of grass had turned pale brown, a sign of the coming autumn. When winter arrived, the flourishing grass would vanish, leaving only traces behind. With the return of warmer days, the tall grass would grow again, nourished by the remnants of the previous year. The cycle repeated every year. Death, then regrowth. Was it nature's law? What about the events unfolding in his life? Today's repetition weighed on his mind, no matter how much he tried to shake it off. Daily monotony couldn't be ignored. But Ingrid had already decided on his approach. Use whatever can be used. This was no exception. He didn't see it as a blessing. Even if it were a curse, nothing would change. After trudging through the grassland for a while, someone tapped Ingrid's shoulder. It wasn't Henry. It was the soldier sticking closely to the squad leader. Our squad leader might seem childish, but try to understand. He has his reasons. He needs to make achievements, but they keep assigning him to reconnaissance duties. He's frustrated. And what was this all of a sudden? You're a squad leader too, right? Forget about the nonsense earlier, please. An odd timing, to say the least. Still, Ingrid accepted the apology without much thought. There was no benefit to harboring resentment while on a mission. Not that there was anything worth getting angry over. Ingrid still believed the same. Rather than waste energy on such things, he'd devote more time to training. Fine. You're generous, squad leader. The soldier smiled. His faded blonde hair and sharp features gave the impression of someone skilled in combat, a complete opposite of big eyes. Simply put, he couldn't be called handsome. Nodding briefly, Ingrid turned and instinctively tuned his hearing. It was then he caught an unusual sound. Rustle. Hiss. Crack. Thanks to what he'd learned from Jackson and consistent training, the effort paid off. That sounds different. The 10 members of the reconnaissance team walked close enough to see each other's backs but not quite touching shoulders. By now, he was familiar with the sound of tall grass being parted. But the noise he heard now was different. It came from farther away. It was the sound of someone moving through grass. Intermingled were the hisses of beasts and the crunch of footsteps. Humans. They weren't allies. The tall grass meadow itself held little value, it was simply a barrier to cross into enemy territory. But beyond the meadow was a plain with no place to hide, making it foolish to traverse. Did their opponents have an equally foolish squad leader who sent a reconnaissance team here? There's someone else besides us, Ingrid said. The sharp-featured soldier ahead blinked, confused. What? His expression asked, what are you talking about? Frowning, he tilted his head. I think I hear it too, Henry chimed in from the right. What? When Ingrid stopped walking, the reconnaissance squad leader stepped back, asking, what is it? Enemies. Ingrid's immediate response was clear, but recognizing the threat was a separate matter. Ping! Thwack! Before they could fully grasp the situation, the enemy's attack had already landed. Ah! The squad leader stepped back, and a short bolt lodged itself in the leading soldier's skull. Ingrid quickly identified the direction of the shot by the sound and examined the bolt's form with his eyes. Bolt! A short arrow, ideal for close-range use. It wasn't meant for longbows. Crossbow! The conclusion came swiftly. As the leading soldier collapsed with a hole in his head, Ingrid shouted immediately, "Get down!" At the same time, he grabbed the squad leader by the collar and pulled him down. Ugh! The squad leader let out a gasp. As they pressed themselves flat to the ground, the dying cries of other soldiers echoed. Front, right, and left. Even if they avoided the initial volley by lowering their stance, death was inevitable. So what should they do? They had to charge out. Choose a direction and break through. There was no room for hesitation. Ingrid, lying flat with his stomach nearly scraping the ground, threw himself toward one side. Rustle! The bushes parted, signaling his movement to the enemy. Predictably, bolts from crossbows came flying toward him. Foolish! Henry shouted in alarm. It looked like a suicide move. Thwack! Half by luck, Ingrid avoided most of the bolts. One, however, struck his left shoulder, but he could now see the enemy. The attackers had cleared some tall grass to create a space for movement. Among the bushes, he spotted a figure dressed in green, holding a crossbow. The moment he saw them, Ingrid drew his sword. Always strike with your best attack, in any stance, at any time. He acted as he'd been trained. He propelled himself off the ground, closing the distance. The enemy tried to reload their crossbow. A fatal mistake. As soon as Ingrid reached striking range, he planted his left foot and thrust his sword. The tip of his arming sword pierced through the air and grazed the enemy's neck. The blade cut through the thin skin of the neck, leaving a sharp line of blood that burst forth, soon flowing in thick streams. The soldier clutched at their neck before collapsing. Ingrid didn't stop. He immediately darted to the left. It was too close for bolts. A spear tip aimed for his chest. Feigning a charge, Ingrid abruptly stopped, letting the enemy's spear stab at empty air. A short spear wielded by a soldier came into view. The soldier's eyes mixed excitement and surprise, a seasoned fighter's gaze. Crossbows, spears, green uniforms. The gear was meant for an ambush. Ingrid absorbed the information in a flash and took another step forward, swinging his sword horizontally. The spearmen retreated, dodging the arc of the blade, then thrust their spear again. Instead of dodging, Ingrid pivoted on his right foot, spinning halfway around, and stabbed his sword again. A seamless combination of offense and defense. The sword pierced the enemy's torso, a dull resistance registering in his grip. The enemy's armor was thick cloth, easy to penetrate with enough force and a sharp blade. Ua! The soldier groaned, dropping their spear and grabbing Ingrid's sword with both hands, blood dripping from their palms. I can't pull it out. His thoughts were brief, his actions quicker. That's the rule for survival on the battlefield. He released the sword and picked up the fallen spear. Whiz! Another enemy swung a crossbow like a club. Thanks to his crouched position, it skimmed over Ingrid's head, dislodging his arming cap. The cold air against his scalp brought a sharp clarity. Ingrid drove the spear into the visible top of the enemy's foot, decorating it with a new injury. Thud! Ah! The scream drew attention. Screams had their uses, they demoralized the enemy. Ingrid lunged at the injured man, grabbed his uninjured knee, and twisted it backward. Snap! Ah! It was a technique he'd learned from a devout squad member, crude but effective. He grabbed the short sword from the fallen man's waist, straightened up, and used the injured enemy as a shield while catching his breath. One side's cleared. The three-way encirclement had one gap now. If things went south, there was room to escape. Lowest-tier soldiers, you said. Henry had approached from behind, speaking in disbelief. That's right. Catching his breath, Ingrid replied. Henry shook his head. That level of skill for the lowest tier. Damn it, I'm just an idiot. The reckoned squad leader spouted nonsense, seemingly unaware of the situation. Don't go ahead. Stay back. One of the surviving soldiers, who looked competent, stepped in front of the squad leader. Only 4 of them remained. The rest of the reckoned squad had been wiped out. Over 20 enemies glared at them with murderous intent. What the hell? One of the Aspen soldiers muttered, looking astonished at Ingrid and then at the 3 dead bodies on their side. Ingrid paid no attention to their surprise. As always, he focused on finding the best course of action. The crossbows remained a threat. The enemy vastly outnumbered them. And he had lost his sword. Run! This was the moment for the mercenary tactic, retreat. Without hesitation, Ingrid turned and sprinted.